last artist talk for today, and then afterwards we'll have the Q&A session. I'll introduce Taylor Baptiste. Taylor Baptiste is an interdisciplinary artist from the Osoyoos Indian Band of the Okanagan Nation. She draws upon her upbringing in Inkameep, a field of sagebrush and wild roses nestled between the mountains and Osoyoos Lake on the Osoyoos Indian Band Reservation. Raised by Richard and Colleen Baptiste, her art practice is deeply rooted in her family, community, and ancestral history. Moreover, she incorporates elements of Syilx storytelling and epistemologies, reflecting a connection to the land and waters of the Okanagan. Taylor sculpturally blends Okanagan land-based materials and Syilx traditional practices with contemporary mediums and modes of making, working with materials ranging from ochre pigment, buckskin, rocks, beadwork, sinew, and ready-made materials. While sculpture serves as her primary mode of expression, Taylor's artistic repertoire also encompasses digital illustration, painting, photography, and most recently, film and projection. In May of 2024, Taylor will be graduating with a Bachelor of Fine Arts from Emily Carr University of Art and Design. Now she resides with her husband in the traditional territory of the Musqueam, colonially known as Vancouver. Please join me in welcoming Taylor Baptiste.
Thank you, Santi. Can everyone hear me good with this microphone? Yeah? Okay. If anybody needs to stretch, I know we've been sitting in here for 2 hours listening to some amazing talks, so feel free to get up and wiggle around if you need to. White Haskell Hall DP Snak Seal in Chai Squeeze Quachuya Kentel Inkami Tali Kenlim Dapna Tiskell Hall. Hi everyone, my name is Taylor Baptiste. I'm from Inkameep, from the Osoyoos Indian Band of the Okanagan Nation. My parents are Richard and Colleen Baptiste. This is a photo of me where I look super cool and not how I look like every day at all. This photo was a gift to me from one of the speakers last week, Dana Warren. Dana Warren, Keula Morwood, and Sydney Pascal from Emily Carr gifted the Indigenous students with some really awesome portraits as grad presents. This is where I was raised in Inkameep. Inkameep is a place at the northeastern end of Osoyoos Lake, and it's a part of who I am. Like, it's a part of my blood and my bones and my family and my art practice. And so I've spent the last 4.5 years away from Inkameep in Vancouver, but all of my work comes back to this place in specifically. So I wanted to share a photo with all of you to see where it comes from. So I wanted to share a bit about my life before I kind of went down this wild journey of becoming an artist. So this is what I was doing like 5 years ago to 8 years ago. I worked at School District 53 in Oliver and Osoyoos as an Indigenous education advocate for the students there. I also coached archery, and during the summer months I would work at the Inkameep Desert Cultural Center. And what's really awesome is one of my students from 5 or 6 years ago is a student at UBCO and in this room today, so it was really cool to see all these different life chapters come together. But even as I was kind of like growing up and throughout this period of my life, I was always a maker. Like, I was always painting, drawing. As a child, I had like what I called my craft corner in the corner of my parents' living room, where I just had like piles and piles of art supplies all the time. They really nurtured that for me. And I loved making rattles, drums, painting them, as well as gifting them to the members of our community who are like the drummers and singers. I don't consider myself a singer at all, so it was really scary and brave to do that earlier today for you all. Thank you, Corey, for inviting me to do that. But I just always have loved making, so these were drums that I made several years ago. And when I approach like what I'm gonna paint, like I always come back to the land and Inkameep, and so on these drums are the bitterroot, one of the 4 food chiefs, as well as a lot of our traditional plants that are found in the Okanagan. Bitterroot, sage, Saskatoon berry, the buttercups, all of those. And I include this, this is my husband, Brett, because he played a huge role in me choosing to become an artist. He saw that I love doing it, and he comes from a family of artists, and he was like, you need to commit your whole self to this. And I was like, no way, you're crazy. And growing up, I never knew anyone that was a career artist that could pay their bills and also do art. Like, for me, it was always like something I did on the weekends or after work. And he was like, no, you gotta do this. And so I listened to him, and he was there, like, I could cry because it's just so beautiful. He helped me do my applications to school because he was also going back to school to do his master's in city and community regional planning. So we were going to be moving to Vancouver, and I was thinking, like, what am I going to do when we move to Vancouver? I could work in another school district, or I could apply to art school. So that's what I did. And I'm so glad I did. So art school was weird. I moved to Vancouver right before the pandemic hit. So I was like, yeah, I'm moving to the big city. And then we were in lockdown and I couldn't leave the house. So as many of you can probably resonate with, all of my first year classes were on Zoom. So I was, really looking forward to, okay, I'm going to art school. I can access these amazing shops and studios. And I was just in my house. So this is a zine I made for one of my first year classes, and it's really fun to look back on. At this time, I created like an art Instagram account to post my things separately from my personal stuff. And like what would you even call it, like social media world is just so fun when it comes to art. Like, people really connected with this, like we all can, through the pandemic. And also when I reflect on what, like, I was scared to become an artist. Like, I was leaving my very stable job in a school district to be an artist, which has been known to not be always a super steady career. So yeah, this is just a fun one to look back on. And because so much of my work at the beginning of my degree was just at home because of the pandemic, I went back to what I knew, and a lot of that is beadwork. So this is my first beadwork that went into a gallery. They are 11 inches long, and they are the 4 food chiefs of the Okanagan. And they were a part of a really fun exhibition at the Bill Reid Gallery, which featured work from dozens of Indigenous artists from across the land. And it was talking about how beadwork connects all of us, like youth to elders to young ones, to our tools. It doesn't matter what nation you're from. We all like to look good and decorate our things with beadwork. And so I started to obviously like progress through school and taking some different courses. And again, I was like looking at what I had around my house, and I had a lot of ochre pigment that I had harvested from the Okanagan. And so I started to really explore with that in my classes at school. So I would take ochre pigment and try different ways of processing it down, as well as mixing it with different mediums, turning it into watercolor paint, mixing it with acrylic medium, mixing it with honey, with spit, like water, and all kinds of things, just kind of really building my relationship with ochre. And so these were some pictographs that I made for my first solo show 2.5 years ago. And so I created pictographs based on some of our Chapteeth, our Okanagan stories. And so the one on the left is how turtle set the animal people free, and the one on the right is chipmunk and monster. And the one on the right is really special to me also because my scale name is Kwekchuya, which translates to chipmunk. So to be able to create a pictograph that has my name in it was really awesome. pictographs are integral to who we are as Okanagan people, and it's important to note that I never one-to-one imitate a pictograph that I've seen out on the land. I sit with them, observe them, learn from them, but all of the pictograph imagery that I create is my own. This is some really awful vandalism that happened in my community during the pandemic, but also when I was living in Vancouver. So I was at home in Vancouver, and I saw this appear on my phone, and this particular pictograph is close to Inkameep, where I grew up. Like, I spent my whole life going to see this pictograph, and it was horribly vandalized. And I remember, like, I get emotional even talking about it now. Seeing our cultural sites be treated like this, it felt grief to the same level as losing a loved one. Thankfully, though, the spray paint has been removed. The Osoyoos Indian Band was able to access one of 2 lasers in the entire world that can remove spray paint. But through this process, like, this really affected my art practice and my research, because I started to, like, ask questions to the scientists that were coming in with these lasers to remove this. And I learned a lot. I did like a whole year of research on the microbiome, microfilm organisms that grow on top of ochre pigment and pictographs after they've been on the rocks for hundreds of years. And so these microorganisms themselves actually become pigmented from the ochre pigment. And so our pictograph sites are living documents, like, quite literally. There are microorganisms on there. And so I wanted to create a sculpture to accompany this research. And so the way I thought that through was, how can I illustrate that these pictographs are living beings? And my thought process of doing that was to take them off of the wall and give them that physical breathing space that we could walk around. So this was a sculpture that I made in my 3rd year at Emily Carr. It's about 10 feet tall, about 4.5 feet across. And this also came from the pictograph rock that you saw a few slides ago, but I had taken that imagery. And so this is based on how turtles set the animal people free. And I just adored this one. Like, this one really made my heart sing when I make my work. And so pictographs, like, are such a big part of my family's, like, where we grew up. There are several pictograph sites very close to us. And so I'm still working on them and, like, trying to build new sculptures on how to illustrate that they're living beings. But it's really difficult taking 2D forms and trying to turn them into 3D while maintaining the integrity of keeping them 2D. So I have a video. This is the prototype for a sculpture. If it'll play. This is the prototype for the sculpture that was my grad project, just recently installed at Emily Carr a few weeks ago. And so I recreated this sculpture out of metal, and it's about 8 feet wide by about 5 or 6 feet tall, hammered textured metal that's hanging in the air. I don't have documentation of it yet because where it was hung in the school is beautiful, like it's right in front of these big windows that overlook the mountains of North Vancouver, but it makes taking photos of it incredibly hard because it's so backlit. So I'm going to have to install it somewhere else to take proper documentation of it. And then kind of switching gears for a moment, coming back to Inkameep, something that happened in 2021 was the Inkameep wildfire. And nearly like 65 or 70% of our reservation burnt. Thankfully, nobody was hurt or affected. The houses remained safe, but it was incredibly scary. This is taken off the deck of my parents' house, and the fire came like right down to that ridge there. And so we evacuated my parents from their house and drove them about 20 kilometers north to my brother's house. But 3 days later, the fire had traveled that far already, so we had to also evacuate from there. And so that was a big moment for my family, for our community, for the land. And so I wanted to create work to process that. So this is a fire extinguisher sculpture that I created out of pine needles from Inkameep. And it's funny when I look at it, I made this for a class 2 days before it was due. So to me, this is not my best work, but I also think that like panic and fast-paced work relates to forest fires because they don't give you warning. Like when they happen, like you just have to get out of there. So I feel like this also connects back to that. And then from there, like I just loved making this and I felt like there was more work to be done. So I started talking to a lot of the people in the community. My brother's on the Oliver Fire Department. And so I was talking to some of the firefighters, and I wanted to create work that could honor the role of those firefighters, but also thinking about doing traditional burns to prevent larger forest fires in the future. And so I started collecting and being gifted with used firefighter gear. For firefighters, if their gear starts to get wear and tear or has small burn holes on it, it can't be used anymore for the firefighter's safety. And so I was given used firefighter gear that was used to fight these forest fires. And I collected pine needles from Inkameep and wove them together with sinew. And I wanted to create a regalia that would honor these firefighters. And then from there, it just kept growing. I was gifted firefighter boots. So I cut up and re-sculptured them into moccasins and sewed them together with rawhide. And to install them in the gallery, it looked really naked in there to just have like white walls and a white plinth with the boots. So I went home and I gathered like bags and bags and bags of dried pine needles off the ground. And it ended up working out really well. I feel like it grounded the pieces in the sites where this work is about, but it also brought with it like a very strong smell. So when you entered the gallery, there was a really strong smell of pine needles, so it was multi-sensory work. This is the full firefighter gear that's being exhibited for the first time out in Sherbrooke. I just got back from Montreal about a week and a half ago installing this, and this is the first time that all of the firefighter gear has been exhibited together. Thank you. And again, I brought the dried pine needles to place on the ground. I created a helmet, and I created a section on the helmet to insert pine needles to mimic a powwow roach for dancing. And I was just thinking about like what this role of a firefighter is, like walking the fire line and protecting our communities and the land. So I'm just so excited that all the work is being exhibited together for the first time. And so this is a look at the gallery with the other artists. I have all the details on my Instagram. But it's really powerful when you walk into this gallery and there's this semicircle of figures all looking at you as you enter the space. Switching it up again, I learned in my degree that I have undiagnosed ADHD. So I constantly have like 4 or 5 different projects going on at the same time. So this is an exhibition that opened in April called Trar Isahuit, which translates to interwoven roots. And so this exhibition comes out of the research of the Inkameep Day School in Osoyoos. And so in the top of this photo is an archival photo from about the 1930s of children at the Inkameep Day School. And then the bottom is a photo that I have taken of my cousin's dancing masks that I created that I'll talk about in a minute here. We don't have time today to learn the entire story of the Inkameep Day School, but this is a book called Inkameep Chronicles that tells the story of the Inkameep Day School. I highly recommend you all read it and check it out. It's available at the Cultural Center in Osoyoos, but also on Thetis Books. And I'm gonna guess that it might be in the UBCO library. But but these resources can teach you about the full story of the day school. But to kind of summarize it in 30 seconds or less, whoa, is in the 1930s, in my community of OIB, we had a day school, and we had a very unique situation where a teacher named Anthony Walsh came to work there, and he was like, he was doing reconciliation before it was a term, and so he prioritized the kids retaining their culture at a time when residential schools were operating, and so he encouraged the kids to still speak their language, to depict their cultural stories and ways through their artwork at school. And we have this, a lot of this big archive still to this day. And the way I'm connected to the day school is my grandpa, Francis, here on the left. He was a child that attended the Incommute Day School and went on to be an artist. He went on to study art in Santa Fe. And the community really rallied around him to continue on his art. And so these are some of the pieces he did when he was a kid there. He passed away before I was ever born, so I never got to know him personally, or listen to him or talk to him. And so my connection to him is through his artwork and this archive. So here's little me researching my grandpa's art, and also going to some gallery exhibitions where his work was in. There's been several different art exhibitions over the last 20 years about this story of the Incommute Day School. And so one of the main professors that worked on this research is Andrea Walsh from the University of Victoria. And so she's been working with our family since I was like 5. And so I kind of grew up with this constant ongoing research of my grandpa's art and the Incommute Day School since I was a kid. It was constantly around our kitchen table, or going up into the attic to find boxes of work, or having family gatherings where people, because all of like my aunts and uncles, like everyone has a different personal collection of his artwork. So it's just been constantly gathering and documenting his work. Here's a collage from a presentation we did a couple weeks ago here at UBCO at the Casca conference about the Terrar Isa Huip exhibition. And so this project, like this recent exhibition, is about how this ongoing research and archive over the last 20 years has been used by so many different people in my community. So I use it, I base a lot of my art practice around it, as well as my family history. In the bottom right there, you can see the folks at the OIB Language House, my cousins Jenna and Jordan Bauer, Elder Jane Stelkaya, Sherry Stelkaya. They use this archive to create language curriculum at our language house. In the photo on the far right above it is our family at the opening of the exhibition at the Vancouver Art Gallery in 2004 about the Incommute Day School. In the top right, you can see me there in green, in a green hat. The OIB community put on a summer camp for the kids of Osuyas to learn about the history of the Incommute Day School, and then we put on one of the plays that the kids of the day school wrote. So I played Turtle in Turtle Races the Hare. In the center is a photo of the kids at the day school, and the man in the back on the right is Anthony Walsh, who was the teacher that really encouraged the kids to do their art. Down here is Andrea and Jane, and some photos of the exhibition that was in Kelowna Art Gallery in 2019. So this exhibition is really like about a group of about 20 of us that have constantly been accessing this archive and are utilizing it to this day. And so for the exhibition, I was asked to create art based on this archive and like how it's impacted me and my family, and like how I as an artist can interact with how this collection has affected me. So I really took inspiration from the children's drawings of the day school, like this one here, and how the kids would depict our Okanagan Baptiste and the plant and animal people. And I just love that they kind of have these human-like bodies, but they have their plant and animal faces. And the kids of the day school would put on plays to tell these stories. So I created a couple of masks. So this is the Sinclair coyote mask that I created. I created it out of rabbit fur. The nose is dried deer hoof. The whiskers are horsehair. And it's got some very nice false lashes. But I didn't just want to make masks that would sit on the wall, like that didn't feel right. I wanted them to be activated, and it's important, sorry I keep flipping, it's important for me to note that these Okanagan masks are used very differently than a lot of masks that other nations use for private ceremonial or longhouse purposes. Like, these masks are made with the intent of like sharing our cultural stories and Baptiste. And so in the top right photo is Jane and Sherry, myself and the group from the language house. We all gathered in the same field that the kids from the Inkamip Day School would perform their plays, and where their school was. And it's really special because Jane is the last living member of our community that attended this day school. And so it was so special that it was very cold in these photos. It was probably about -10 and windy in January. And so there they are in the top right photo referencing the book to try to find exactly where we should stand in the field that matches the archival photos of the children. And so my cousins Jenna and Jordan did traditional Okanagan dancing wearing the masks. And so we all gathered out there. And so these are some photos of them doing the dancing. And their great-grandma was the one in the archival photo on the exhibition poster. And what's really special here too is that Jordan is 7 months pregnant here, so it's like very intergenerational work going on. Here's another photo of them. And for me, like, what brought it all together was seeing Jane's smile, seeing this work happen. The sun even came out after the dancing happened, and it was just a beautiful day. After a part of the day school story I didn't mention was after Anthony Walsh, the teacher, left, he left to serve in World War II. A different teacher came in who was not as supportive of the kids and the Okanagan culture, and actually took a lot of the kids' masks, regalia, drawings, and put them in a garbage bag and put them in the wood stove of the school and burnt them. So it was kind of like a very hurtful place for our community. But to see the smile on her face and to see the work become activated again like 70 years later is just so special. And then to switch it up again, sometimes you make work and you never know how it's gonna impact people. This is a fun sculpture I made for like a quick start project in one of my classes. Our prompt was to make work out of like massively produced materials. And so I gathered a bunch of pool noodles and I cut them up in my living room while watching TV, and it made the most horrific sound you've ever heard. And I did it for hours, and I apologized profusely to my husband. But it all worked out. And what's funny is, like, once you put things out on Instagram, they might live a life of their own. And Indian country went crazy and turned me into a bunch of memes. So it's like, sometimes you make work and you pour your heart into it, and it's a little bit quieter, but sometimes you do something silly and everyone goes crazy. So the bigger the beaded earrings, the closer the creator. Nobody, Native women in their earrings. There was another one, I couldn't find it while I was putting this presentation together, but it said, like, when you have to defeat the final anti-boss, and like all these funny things. But yeah, I recently graduated on May 8th. Thank you. It was really hard, but we did it. So now I'm trying to navigate what I'm going to do next. You don't need a degree at all to get an artist, to become an artist, but for me, going to Emily Carr really felt like an incubator for me to just like fully explore what I'm thinking about, and it gave me access to incredible shops and studios and technicians that helped me on my journey. I recently had kidney stone surgery on top of graduating, kidney stone removal surgery, so it's been a really crazy month for me. So while I'm doing my residency here, it's been really important for me to prioritize rest in being an artist. In my final semester at school, I completed 21 credits, and I think that's what gave me kidney stones. And it's just so special to me that my first residency and first artist talk can be in my home territory. Yeah. So now I'm figuring out what I'm gonna do next. Again, I have like 6 different things constantly going on in my head, so I spent the first few days of my residency kind of just brain dumping them all on paper and creating a big mind map and figuring out what I want to do next, but it's definitely very sculpture based. And here is a QR code to my Instagram if you would like to follow along while I make things. Thank you. Ihiwai.